Let me stay and work for you. I'll even get you pregnant, the mountain man begged the rich obese widow. They lowered Ambrose Vale into the red ground behind Lantern Ridge while the wind worried at the cedar limbs and the town tried not to stare. Magnolia Vale stood square at the grave in a black dress tailored for smaller grief. She had money, cattle, timber, a share of the Coldwater Bank, but none of it could soften the hard arithmetic of death. Ambrose had married her late and sick and polite. She had spent the marriage learning ledgers, holding cups to cracked lips, and sleeping in a chair no vows had warmed. She had run the ranch when he could not stand, and she knew exactly how much feed a hungry spring could swallow. She also knew which men were already measuring her gates. The men circling her future had other sums in mind. Bartholomew Fitch, owner of outlying pastures and a conscience that could be folded into a vest pocket, waited for the widow to bend. Sheriff Bram Keever, civil as a fresh shave, had opinions that could be rented by the hour. Magnolia knew how to watch a man's hat to see who owned his head. 3 days after the funeral, Keever came with hounds and a warrant hunting a mountain drifter named Iver Holt for stealing a bay mare off Fitch's herd. Magnolia listened on the porch, eyes steady, hands resting like tools she knew how to use. "If I see him," she said, "I'll ask what he's run from. Then I'll decide what he's running toward." The trigger pulled near dusk on the third evening, when the ridge tossed its long shadow toward the creek and magpies stitched the air with gossip. Magnolia had ridden out alone to check the north fence. Hounds bayed from the pines. A man crashed through the brush with a pack big enough to qualify as a stubborn friend. Deputies followed, pistols out, yelling like thin men taking up space. He reached the creek and chose wrong, turning into open grass. Magnolia kicked her mare into the gap between prey and pursuers. Deputies reined short at the sight of the widow riding, like a woman who knew the land meant her well. "Deputy Markham," she called, "you and your dogs are trespassing." Tully Markham tried to glare and be respectful at the same time. "Ma'am, that man stole Fitch's bay." "Fitch's word is not scripture at Lantern Ridge," she said. "Lower your guns." "Law's the law." "Then bring it with the right paper," Magnolia replied, producing a deed Ambrose had bought with foresight and lawyers. "This says you don't take shots on my grass." They slunk away to collect more signatures. The hunted man stood 30 yards off, breathing like a bellows and watching Magnolia like a man who'd seen the ocean and been offered a cup. Up close he was tall and raw-boned, sun-marked, with hands nicked by work and eyes that checked exits while looking you full in the face. "Ma'am," he said, "you didn't have to do that." "I don't hold with shooting at a man before he gets a sentence," she said. "What's the truth?" "I traded a played-out mule for a bay at Sable Peak Line Camp," he said. "Left my mark." 2 days later, a hand called theft. Fitch's brand. The sheriff listened to the richest voice in the room. "What's your name?" "Iver Holt." "I'm Magnolia Vale. Come up to the house. You can wash and eat. Then we'll see what the law pretends to be." Lantern Ridge's big house looked like ambition on a hill. Magnolia had made it livable with rugs, warm lamps, and the stubborn quiet of competence. Iver pumped water at the back stoop, scrubbed trail out of his skin, and became younger by 5 hard years. He ate stew like a man who had been doing math with hunger and had finally balanced something. "Fitch will try again," Magnolia said. "He doesn't enjoy the experience of being told no." "I can move on." "You can also help," she said. "Fence, roof, a colt with opinions." "I'll earn my keep," he answered. He did. In 3 days, the north fence sang true when plucked. By week's end, he'd replaced rotten rafters on the smokehouse and gentled the colt by offering patience until pride looked foolish. Hands studied him without announcing it. Magnolia watched the yard's rhythm change. Fewer shouts, more work, less drama. She found herself listening for his step on the porch like a clock she trusted. Sheriff Keever brought a warrant for Iver and a search order for outbuildings. Magnolia kept him on the porch until the coffee cooled. "You may search what the paper names. Not my bedroom, not my desk. If you turn drawers, you'll put them back." He nodded because something in her voice made arguing feel like poor arithmetic. Deputies searched. They found nothing but order and a man with rough manners who didn't lie even by accident. Word carried farther than hounds. Fitch arrived in a fine coat and a thin smile. "Mrs. Vale," he said, rolling sympathy thin as tin, "you're harboring wildfire." "I'm harboring a worker," Magnolia said. "Bring your witnesses if you claim theft. Bring your proof if you claim water rights. Bring your honesty if you can find any. He lifted his hat and left a threat lying on the step like a dead snake waiting to be stepped on twice. That night, Iver walked the yard with a lantern while Magnolia checked columns under lamplight. He came to the doorway and waited until she looked up. "I never aimed to drag trouble into a widow's house," he said. "You didn't drag it," she said. "It already lived here. It just prefers to wear other men's boots." He stood there awkward and brave. "Then let me say the foolish thing and mean it. Let me stay and work for you. On wages, on your terms. And if you'll ever have it, I'll give you an heir. I'll get you pregnant, not as payment for kindness, as a life I can build with my hands." The room could have laughed. Magnolia did not. He was not selling. He was volunteering for a war he didn't fully understand and offering the only weapon he owned, himself. She had been measured by cruel inches her whole life, waistlines and expectations, and watched men shrink around her when asked for more than pocket change. He didn't look away from her body or try to pretend it didn't exist. He looked at her like a woman who owned land and decisions. "Work," she said. "We'll speak of heirs when I ask." Fitch did what men like Fitch do. He bought affidavits. He whispered about irregularities in Magnolia's books. He leaned on the bank until the cost of nails went up for Lantern Ridge and down for everyone else. Iver came back with a wider search order and an apologetic face. Magnolia opened doors, stood in doorways, and reminded men to respect hinges. Nothing illegal turned up, so Fitch changed tools. One moonless night, riders cut the main water line and ran the herd toward the arroyo. Iver woke at the first wrong sound, slammed boots on, and shouted the yard to its duty. Magnolia took the east flank with a shotgun and a will. Iver intercepted a pair of shadows with cutters, knocked one to dirt, took a knife along the ribs from the other, and kept going because blood is a bad clock. The herd slowed under hard riding and honest curses. The waterline spat mud and nothing else. In the lantern light, they found a brander's iron dropped in the dust. Fitch's boys, sloppy with confidence. By dawn, they had the cattle back. By breakfast, Magnolia stitched Iver's side at the pump while he made jokes inappropriate for a man leaking. "What if I can't hold this place against him?" he asked through clenched teeth. "Then we make it expensive to try," she said, tying a knot like a small verdict. Fitch filed papers claiming Ambrose had promised parts of the creek to him, that Magnolia had violated water rights, that her books begged for supervision. In court, Magnolia wore a black jacket, spoke like a ledger, and did not soften facts for men with soft hands. Judge Ransom frowned over Fitch's filings, asked real questions, and sent the lawyers home to return with proofs instead of posture. Iver began to look like a man changing sides inside his own skin. The next attack skipped signatures. 3 men came silent with kerosene and a match. Cook's hound woke the yard. Iver met the first arsonist with a seasoned length of wood and learned you can break a man's intention without breaking his bones. The second lit the hardware shed. Fire climbed the boards like it had waited years for its chance. Magnolia had to choose. Save the ledgers in her office, the spine of her fight, or save the shed and the tools that kept the place running. She shouted men to the shed and ran for the office. Smoke slapped, heat shoved. She wrapped the ledgers in a blanket like babies and staggered when a beam groaned. Iver appeared out of flame and hauled her through a door that wanted to quit. They fell into night air and gray ash. Men beat fire back into wood. The office lived ugly but alive. The ledgers lived. Magnolia sat on the steps coughing and shaking. Iver knelt in the dirt. She laid a sooty palm against his cheek because something underneath had finally earned the right to be touched. "You stayed," she said. "I learned there's no good leaving," he answered. The judge ordered a full review of Fitch's claims and found ink where water should have been. The bank decided to be neutral for a season. Iver returned with a different hat in his hand. "I was wrong," he said on the porch. "I won't be again." Magnolia believed him enough to loan him a cup of coffee. When quiet came, it didn't rewrite the world. It simply let honest noises be heard, hammers answering, calves bawling, a windmill creaking in a rhythm you can trust. Iver's cut healed to a stiff line. He worked without being told. Magnolia found her shoulders lowering 1 inch at a time, not to make herself smaller, but because the constant brace of battle had been eased by a man holding up his half. Under the cottonwoods by the lower creek, where Ambrose had once offered her politeness instead of passion, Magnolia faced the harder offer. You meant what you said in my doorway, she told Iver. I don't say things I can't carry, he replied. Stay, she said. Work. And when I ask, we'll try for a child. Not to prove anything to town or ghost. To make something that's ours. He reached for her hand the way a man reaches for a tool he respects, and she gave it without apology. They married in the parlor with the doors open wide so the house could breathe. Cook signed as witness because the minister was down with fever, and the sheriff knew his place in a room by then. The hands cheered. Fitch rode by on the far road, pretending he had somewhere pressing to be. It rained lightly, like the sky decided not to argue. Nights became plain and good. Some ended with a lamp turned low and a door shut on the world. Magnolia found that intimacy could be quiet and fierce, while respectful of the dignity she had taught herself to guard. There were no speeches, no bargains, no debt language. Just two people aligning the furniture of their lives. In winter, she put a hand on her belly by the wash basin and felt a small certainty and smiled into her own mirror without flinching. She told Iver beside the pump while the water ran cold and honest. He looked at her face, not her belly first. I told you, he said, foolish with joy. You did, she said, returning to bookkeeping wickedness. And I told you it would be because I asked. Spring came with mud and calves and the kind of laughter that looks like rest finding its voice. The town learned new arithmetic. Prices at the mercantile stopped punishing Lantern Ridge. Keever jailed 2 of Fitch's cowhands for arson and slept better. Fitch sold a parcel and discovered that important men in other counties had long memories and little patience for losers. The baby arrived near dawn on a June morning after a night that stretched itself too far. Cook boiled water and bossed angels. The midwife muttered certainty. Iver stood where he was told and used his strength to be gentle. Magnolia fought like a woman who had been holding the world on one shoulder and decided it could sit still while something new took its first breath. The child announced herself with a cry that made the windows agree to stay put. They wrapped the girl and set her on Magnolia's chest. She stared around as if auditing the room. She had Iver's pale eyes and Magnolia's determined mouth. June, Magnolia said. June Vale Holt. Iver said the name out loud, and it sounded like a fence wire plucked in tune. Life didn't become simple. The creek ran low in August, and they rationed with the firmness of adults. A bull tested a gate, and a boy learned the cost of inattention and survived because Webb had watched Magnolia stitch and remembered. Fitch's cousin hinted at fresh paper and stood down when the judge raised an eyebrow he'd learned from Magnolia. Hard days came, and nobody demanded a refund from Providence. What changed was posture. Magnolia walked through town without trimming herself to fit men's eyes. Iver sometimes walked half a step behind, not as shadow, but to make it clear whose story this had always been. The hands teased him for turning soft. He answered by outworking them before noon. Magnolia revised a ledger and hummed tunes that did not apologize for existing. June grew into a small storm with a kind heart and a talent for clapping at fences that sang true when plucked. On the anniversary of the fire, they took June to the cottonwoods. Magnolia told the story plain. Iver added the small details that make truth feel like memory, the weight of the ledger blanket, the taste of ash, the sound a beam makes when it decides not to crush you after all. June clapped at the good parts and scowled at Fitch's name. Bad man, she said, earning herself pie later. They sat until the creek finished its talk and the ridge collected the day's last light. Remember the first time you saw me? Iver asked. I was running wrong. You've run better since, Magnolia said. I had help. Keep it, she answered. They walked back to the house. The porch gave its familiar creak. Magnolia no longer mistook it for a warning. It was the sound of a home telling you it remembered you. Inside, supper waited, and after supper, the quiet, and after quiet, the tomorrow where fences would need tightening, and calves would need doctoring, and a woman would balance numbers like a form of prayer. Justice in the West isn't a gavel, it's habit. You do right again and again until wrong gets tired. On a blue morning with windmills ticking, Iver checked the wire, and Magnolia wrote in a ledger, while June crawled to a sun patch and grinned like a thief of light. Magnolia set down her pen and watched them both. She thought of the girl who had stood hard at Ambrose's grave and agreed to be measured by no one but herself. Then she breathed a thank you to the air and to the man who had offered foolish honesty at her doorway. and to the child who would inherit a place tuned to the truth. The wind came through the cottonwoods and made coins of the leaves. The fence sang a note so clean you could walk toward it. Magnolia smiled and went back to work, which is how love keeps its promises out here, one useful act at a time. Coldwater priced people by what they cost and what they could carry. Market day after the fire, Magnolia hitched the wagon and drove in with Iver on the bench and June asleep in a padded crate that used to hold eggs. Folks looked up because staring was free. Magnolia walked into the mercantile, set her list on the counter, and waited until Mr. Tarpon remembered how to be fair. Wire, nails, lamp oil, harness rivets, flour and sugar, blue calico enough for a dress, she said. Price it honest. Time's money and mine's busy. He started to mention supply. She met his eyes. He wrote numbers that wouldn't embarrass his grandchildren, filled the order, and carried the sacks himself. On the porch, two men let the word widow do cheap work. Magnolia turned her head like she was checking a fence line for obvious holes. Iver looked at them, and then at a harness he was mending, and kept his mouth as closed as a bank vault. At the bank, Jasper Dunn spoke the way men do when they hope civility will pass for courage. Transitions cause uncertainty, he said. Uncertainty happens when you trust the wrong men, Magnolia replied. I brought my books. Sheriff Keever will watch you read. Keever, summoned without fuss, leaned on the door while Jasper walked through the columns. Income, outlay, freight, wages, tax, no leaks, no slop. Jasper tapped a page, found nothing to tap twice, and shut his pen like it hurt. Your accounts are adequate. They're excellent, Magnolia said. Say it when Fitch comes fishing. On their way out, an old woman with a shawl and a spine like an iron ruler stopped them. My Jory worked your north pasture, she said. Strict and fair, he called you. Then he named me right. Strict and fair kept him alive long enough to give me a grandson, the woman said. Keep at it. They drove home by the river road. The colt with opinions had turned into a horse that liked being told the truth. Iver held the reins easy and watched June discover her own hands. You looked happy correcting a banker, he said. I look like a woman who won't have her competence priced by gossip, she answered. There's a difference. That evening he haltered a skittish gelding and taught Webb and two hands how yield works. Don't force, he said. Ask and reward. Pride grows better when you don't stomp it. Webb glanced at Magnolia. Boss, the new fella keeps talking like that. We'll have to start reading. She said start with the word payday. Later, when the house was warm and quiet, Magnolia opened a small tin from the desk. Inside lay a letter Ambrose had written with medicine, shaking his hand. Maggie, it began, if the books outlast me, they're yours. Don't let men afraid of a woman's gravity tell you to orbit small. I'd have done more by you if I'd been a different man. Truth takes what it can get from us and calls it love. Do better with the next truth you're given. She passed the page to Iver. He read and didn't judge the dead. Tomorrow we set posts along the East Gully, he said. We'll want 3 extra hands for rock. Do, she said, and felt gratitude land like a warm coat. Through summer they worked. Magnolia learned which muscles had been tense by habit and could now rest. She taught Iver to calculate freight against rail schedules. He grinned when the sum fell in his favor. He taught her to listen for storms by the height of swallows. Marriage turned out to be mostly quiet projects finished well. Fitch's final gesture arrived as a letter with a heavy seal and light substance. He offered to buy Lantern Ridge at a valuation reflecting recent difficulties. Magnolia wrote one sentence in reply. Lantern Ridge is not for sale at any price you can afford. Keever delivered it personally and took a slow route back. First frost rhymed the troughs. Snow came early. Inside, bread rose and June learned to pull herself up and clap for her own rhythm. Iver kissed the back of Magnolia's hand as she passed because he wanted their child to see love in daylight, not just hear about it. On New Year's, as fireworks from town popped like small brush fires, they stood on the porch and watched their breath. What's next? He asked. Exactly this, she said. The ordinary done right. It's how you beat men who need the world to be a stage. He leaned his weight against her like a promise. The year turned. They clapped anyway for their own reasons.